Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Chet Kerr. I'm on the board of the Irvington Historical Society, and I want to welcome everyone here today to this, what I hope to be a wonderful presentation about Peter Oley. This is round two. Scott Mosenthal, who I'll introduce in a second, did a program about Peter Oley and his role as a track coach, which was a great story. But this is about all the other reaches of Peter's life, which is very fascinating. So a couple of logistical things. One, we are recording this session, and we will be posting it up on the Irvington Historical Society website after today's presentation. And two, as you hear about the presentation, or you have things you know about Peter Oley and you have questions you want to pose to Scott or to some of the panelists we're going to have at the end, you should put them in the chat. And that way, at the end of the presentation, Scott be able to go through those and hopefully answer those, as well as some other things that he wants to bring out of this. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to everybody probably someone who needs little or no introduction, and that is Scott Mosenthal. Scott was a longtime member of our community in his role as both a teacher and as the principal of the high school, but as continued to be a real potent force in the community through his work on the Irvington Historical Society board and all of his other activities he does. And it's been, it's interesting. My kids went through the schools, and I always heard about Scott Mosenthal. They'd always gripe about him, blah, 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 blah. That's not true. But it's been a tremendous pleasure of mine to get to know Scott personally and work with him through our work on the Historical Society. And it's just remarkable. What a nice guy. So Scott, I'm going to turn this over to you, and you're off. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chet. And of course, the feeling is mutual. For those who have been attending these various webinars and Zoom things, Chet has done a lion's share of them, and not only does he handle the ones he puts out, but of course, for technical amateurs like myself, he is instrumental in making sure that what comes out the way it's supposed to. So, Chet, a huge thanks to you for all your work, and that's just scrapes the surface of what you've done for the society. So again, thanks for helping to make this work. So good afternoon and welcome to today's Irvington Historical Society presentation entitled Peter Oley, Round 2, Village Historian, Church Member Extraordinaire, Track Designer, Environmental Activist, and Trails Expert. My name is, as Chet said, Scott Mosenthal, and I will be your host today. Many, many thanks to all of you for joining us. Again, as Chet mentioned, some of you may recall that several years ago, I, with the help of Eric Oley and a number of former students and track athletes of Coach Oley, traced the impact he had on those who had had him as a coach and/or teacher. Invariably, those who contributed referred to his deep passion, his endless energy, and his love of all things Irvington. And a little sidebar here, if you did miss that event, you can still find it. It's on the Irvington Historical Society website. You look under past events and you go to April 2021, and you will find that particular presentation about Peter as a coach and teacher. Today, I, again, with the help of a number of people who work with him in the village and knew him very well, will present several sides of Peter that are, I think, a little less well known perhaps than his singular accomplishments as a teacher and coach, but in some ways are equally, if not more, significant. Peter's passion, energy, and love for Irvington extended well beyond the classroom and the track. He played an instrumental role in guiding the village's environmental policies and practices. He worked tirelessly on behalf of the Presbyterian Church, and he was instrumental in helping the Irvington Historical Society become the vibrant, essential organization it is today. He also served as a mentor to a number of young men who shared his love of the woods and helped him in its development. The program you're about to see will feature a 40-minute video comprised of interviews with those who work with Peter in those various capabilities. The goal here is to fill in the gap of the public portrait that was introduced in Finnish Line, a retrospective of Peter Oley, beloved coach and teacher. At the finish of this event, and that finish is spelled with one N, I think you'll agree with me that he very well may be one of the most influential villagers Irvington has had in the past 50 years. We'll begin with Peter's role with the Irvington Historical Society. A lover of all things historic, but especially when it came to Irvington, Peter's involvement in the Historical Society was a natural fit. After a 3-year stint as the society president, when he helped to restart the organization in 1995, he served as the village historian for 12 years. Under his leadership, and that of others, a couple of whom you will hear from today, the society grew from several dozen members to several hundred. We will begin this segment with Henry Steiner's 2003 recollection of Peter. Mr. Steiner is the president of the Sleepy Hollow Historical Society and a venerable figure in his own right, has written 2 books on the history of the Tarrytown, Sleepy Hollow area. I will narrate his recollection. That will be followed by 2 former renowned and legendary presidents of the Irvington Historical Society, who knew Peter for decades. They will discuss Peter's impact on that organization. Betsy Wilson will lead off, followed by Pat Ryan. Peter also played an important role at the Irvington Presbyterian Church, as did his wife, Mary Ann, who was the administrative assistant for several decades. He was a member for 40 years. He sang in the choir. He served as deacon, as a ruling elder and church historian, and president of the Board of Trustees. He was the chair of the church's sesquicentennial committee that organized that celebration in 2003. He wrote the History of the Presbyterian Church booklet. The beloved pastor of the church for many of those years was Reverend David Harkness, who will talk about Peter and Mary Ann's impact upon the church. As many of you know, the track at the Irvington High School Middle School campus, as well as the trail system in the Irvington Woods, are named after Peter Oley. Former Irvington school administrator, village official, and revered teacher Don Merrow, whose students, by the way, called him God, provides an inside account as to how Peter's involvement in those landmarks was indicative of how he tackled any endeavor with unbridled enthusiasm and a remarkable degree of knowledge. Peter's contribution to the Irvington Environmental Conservation Board, of which he was a founding member in 1971, and for which he served on its board for 27 years, has had an enduring impact upon the footprint of the village. We will conclude our program first by hearing from Jan Blair, a fellow member of the Environmental Board and a kindred spirit who shared his passion for the environment and spent countless hours hiking with Peter through those woods. She will then be followed by Jeremy Graham, a former Irvington High School student, whose Eagle Scout project for the Irvington Woods was overseen by Peter. The final interviewee is former Irvington student and cross-country runner Ian Matthews, whose relationship with Peter as they worked to develop the trail system led to a lifelong impact. The program will then conclude with any comments and or questions that you may have about the inimitable Peter Oley. And we will do that, as Chet said, via the chat button feature after the video has concluded. All but one of those, I think we actually have, all but one of those who were interviewed will be joining us at that point. And my goal here will be to make sure that we hear from each of the interviewees since they're taking the time out of their Sunday afternoon to be with us today. So let's turn now to Henry Steiner's account written in 2003. To call Peter Oley an Irvington institution would be terribly inadequate. The word simply does not convey the energy and enthusiasm that radiates from the man. Peter has officially retired from teaching and coaching, but the word retired is also misleading. In his own way, he is still coaching and still teaching. Today, Peter is officially the village historian of Irvington. I spoke with him recently, historian to historian. You don't need to ask Peter a lot of questions to get answers. Peter is a walking compendium of Irvington history and lore. Speaking with him is like standing in a gale of information. Not all the information is about the distant past. He has an uncanny ability to report, chapter and verse, the progress, careers, triumphs, whereabouts of his beloved students and athletes. One of the most ingratiating aspects of Peter Oley is his readiness to credit the efforts and achievements of others. The successes of a motivated group of Irvingtonians in vitalizing the Village Historical Society, and the unprecedented successes of the Irvington track teams that Peter has coached. We met in front of the newly restored Irvington History Center near the top of Main Street. Peter was born in 1933 and moved to the Tarrytown area at the age of 8. His mother taught at North Tarrytown High School, where Peter excelled as a runner. Now, once a year, Irvington hosts the Doc Rasbeck Relays, dedicated to Peter's charismatic North Tarrytown High School coach. Coach Oley was active in the Boy Scouts as a youth. After high school, he served in the Navy. In 1968 and 69, he was the director of the Westchester County camps. The McVicker House is a mid-19th century dwelling and the second oldest in the business district of the village. The oldest is the Dearman Farmhouse, which stands directly across the street. The McVicker House was built in 1853. It has been lovingly transformed into a home for the Historical Society. Irvington Village history has been another passion of Peter's for many years. His new office is on the second floor of 131 Main Street. In 2002, the village of Irvington bought the old McVicker House, and after 3 years of donation and volunteerism, the new Irvington History Center emerged. As we ascended the stairs together, Peter rattled off the family history of one old village family. We discussed the old Odell Tavern, which is privately owned and recently underwent some restoration by some artisans from Lyndhurst. He also credited the research and writings of other historians within the society. We have 30 historians, he said. The History Center was buzzing when I met with Peter in July. The Society issues a regular newsletter, The Roost, and the current issue includes an article by Peter Oley on Civil War figure General Samuel Thomas, who lived in Irvington. The first annual house tour of historic homes last June met with outstanding success. With his new village historian's office at the McVicker House, Peter is as close to the center of Irvington's life as ever. Some of his earliest students have already retired from the business, and he will in due course have plenty of fresh history to write about.
My first glimpse of Peter Oley came at a coffee I attended at Adele Warnock's in 1994. This was a think tank session to revamp the defunct Irvington Historical Society. During that meeting, Peter agreed to be president. Barbara Scully would be the curator. Subsequently, a fabulous board was formed, and off we went. I had the pleasure of working alongside Peter for the next 14 years. The Society's headquarters moved around from a third-floor walk-up shared space to the Bridge Street complex, and then eventually to the McVicker House. Peter was a hands-on guy who loved creating storage and display spaces for the archive materials. As village historian and as the Society's president, he was always immersed in learning, researching, and talking about everything Irvington. When we finally moved into the McVicker House in 2005 as permanent headquarters for the Society, Peter was home. Over an office door upstairs is a sign stating, Historian's Office, dedicated to Peter Oley. A remarkable exhibit was researched and interpreted by Peter in 2008, called Those Who Served. It highlighted well over 50 current and former Irvington residents who served in the armed forces from the Revolutionary War to the war in Iraq. The exhibit included uniforms, personal histories and remembrances, memorabilia, the journeys during service, and the homecomings. Peter put his all into this fabulous history of and about those from Irvington, and rightfully so, he was very proud of what he accomplished. A keepsake journal was published. Wouldn't Peter be thrilled to know many of us are now doing research on him? Thank you, Peter. You are now an Irvington legend in perpetuity.
It's hard to describe what it was like working with Pete at the Irvington Historical Society. He really was an amazing man. There wasn't an aspect of Irvington's history that didn't fascinate him. No matter how obscure or how small a piece of information or a question was, Pete was determined to uncover everything he could about it. I used to describe him as being like a dog with a bone. He would gnaw away at it until he had covered everything he could. And while others might be mired in such an activity, Pete gloried in it. He was never happier than when he was poring over an old map or obscure writings that might hold the answer to the question. And when he found that answer, you were going to hear about it, every detail, whether you wanted to or not. When I picture Pete, he's always in motion, talking, pointing, gesturing, rifling through papers on his desk, walking Irvington streets, pointing out small details or telling the history of a particular place. He had an incredible mind. In the same way that he could recall the stats of all of his runners, past and present, he could recall details of Irvington's history. And Pete never let criticism dissuade him. It was almost like he didn't hear it. He would just move on, take a different tact, find another way to accomplish his goal. And he would do it with a smile. Pete had a wonderful smile.
Hello, my name is David Harkness, and I've been asked to speak about Peter Oley. I was his pastor at the Irvington Presbyterian Church, and I was happy to be so. I'm now the former pastor of the church, but I can't talk about Peter in his work at the church without speaking about Mary Ann, his wife, because she was the church secretary, or we would say administrator, for 32 years. And not only the administrator for the church, but for the school at the church, Good Shepherd. And so she was the face and voice of the church. That was her domain. And Peter had his work really outside the life of the church as a teacher, coach, and village historian, and all the things that he did. And Mary Ann had her domain and her work in the life of the church. And a particularly difficult work to do because she was also a member, as was Peter. And so to be the administrator and a member of the church, dealing with finances and confidences and all the rest can be complicated, but she handled it with grace and practicality and many wonderful traits. But Peter was often at the church to speak with Mary Ann about practical matters in their family and so forth. And with Peter, of course, there were no brief conversations. So we knew one another in that way. As he retired from teaching and his work life became a little less complicated and his weekends less complicated, Peter became more involved in the life of the church. Irvington Presbyterian Church is a historic building designed by the renowned architect James Renwick, with windows by the Tiffany Company. And as in the mid-1990s we contemplated putting in a pipe organ and making some interior changes to our sanctuary, obviously Peter was quite interested. And then shortly after that, we put in a set of 4 bells in our steeple to complement the existing bell, and had it tuned so that it could be a true or real carillon. And Peter was quite intrigued and interested in that effort as well. He became an elder in the church, an officer, responsible for buildings and grounds, an office he took seriously and put in hours, ensuring that we kept up with any needed repairs and enhancements. And then as 2003 approached, we realized that was going to be the 150th anniversary of the founding of the church. And he was chair of that committee, organized the events and the celebrations of that particular November 2003 weekend. And in order to get ready for that, he spent hours organizing and studying the old church records that went back to 1853. And I wouldn't say that they were copious, but we would get questions from every now and again from somebody who wanted to know about the windows, or they were doing some degree in Tiffany and wanted to know our story. And anytime something like that came up, it was always turned over to Peter to dig into the records and give some better and serious answer to the matters. And then in that 2003 150th anniversary, Peter was the one who wrote the official history of the church, which we still use, a kind of a summary, like a 2-page summary. Peter gave to the church the very same kind of gifts that he gave to everything that he did, namely time and attention. Those are the basic gifts, but then he always added the gift of passion, and that's what made time and attention valuable. There was also a resilience to Peter because he lost an eye in a cataract surgery that didn't turn out so well. But even so, he was still driving his Jeep and keeping active. It didn't really put him down much. He had a tremendous sense of wonder for the natural world, for the woods of Irvington, for the river, for just the natural things that were around us. And then for people. Everyone in his language was special in his or her own way. And everyone had potential. So he loved children. And I mean, theologically, we would say everyone was redeemable. But after his year-long battle with colon cancer, we had a memorial service for Peter at the church, April 25th of 2009. One of the largest attended events in the life of the church. Had to set up a lot of overflow seating. And his children spoke beautifully about his private life as well as his public life. And Scott Mosenthal was also one of the speakers. At that service, we lifted up his dedication and profound impact on students, sports, village, and church. And we reminded ourselves, as the letter to the Hebrews puts it, to run with perseverance the race that is set before us. But before that particular line, the text says, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us run with perseverance. So among those witnesses to our journey through life and faith will be Peter Oley. And that will be probably the loudest voice on the sidelines, encouraging us to finish the race, to work through obstacles, and to work through our weariness and all of the things that life presents. And it'll be a very passionate and persistent voice that so many of us continue to hear. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Mara, and first let me just say how privileged I am to be able to speak to you today about my good friend Peter Oley. I spent about 34 years of my professional career in Irvington. I started out as a teacher and coach at the high school. I became the assistant superintendent for business and facilities for the district. And later in my career, I became the village administrator for the village of Irvington. And every one of these positions, Pete Oley was involved. As a teacher and a coach, I often would see Pete Oley at the high school. Although he taught at Dow's Lane, he coached at the high school. And many, many afternoons, he would walk into the shop, which was next to the gym and the track, and I would show him projects and drawings that the kids were doing. He loved it because he believed in practical education, and he actually used practical education when he taught the young kids at Dow's Lane. And as a coach, he'd often talk to me about the players on my team. I coached JV basketball, and he knew them, of course, coming up through Dow's Lane. And I often felt that he was looking to get some information and see how he could apply that information for his track team and which kids maybe would be really good track players. So I moved on to the position of assistant superintendent for business and facilities. And I love Pete, but I'll never forget the first day on the job. Knock on the door, I'm probably in my office for about an hour, and there's Pete Oley. They say, Don, congratulations on your new position. Can I sit down for a minute? I said, sure, Pete. He said, I want to talk to you about the track. The track really needs resurfacing. I said, Pete, I'd love to talk to you about the track, but just give me a couple of days to get started here. But please get back to me, and let's see what we could do to get that track resurfaced. So I said, I'm going to need your help, Pete. I know you're an expert in this area. You were around when the track was surfaced the first time. So we sat down, we put a plan together, and he was actually going to be my clerk of the works. He knew all the contractors, he knew the best bidders, and together we put the plan together. And that summer, the track was resurfaced, and Pete was there every single day. And he made sure that it was done properly. You know, the track surface is made of rubber and other material, and the formula is important. If a contractor cheats on one expensive ingredient, the track won't last as long. So Pete was there, watched them mix everything up, watched the application of the product, and it turned out absolutely beautiful. And I know he was very proud of the resurfacing project, and I certainly was too, and I couldn't have done it without him. So it was great to have Pete Oley help me with that project. Later on, I became the village administrator, and I was thinking about this. My first day on the job, Pete once again came to my office to congratulate me, but I knew there was something else on his mind, because that's Pete. As you know, Pete loved the woods and the trails, and so he sat down and we talked. He said, Don, I was going to tell you, I really want to map the trails. I said, Pete, I just got started on this job. Do me a favor. Why don't you help me out? Tell me what needs to be done. I'll be behind you 100%. And let's get that working. Let's work on that. A couple of days later, he called me, or he already had called the county. The county had GPS services, and they were willing to walk the trail with GPS equipment on their back, 2 employees. And I said, Pete, when are you going? What day? Because I want to be there. I had never walked the entire trail. So he told me what day. That day I brought in my walking shoes, And what a day. I think it was the fall, a beautiful day. And Peter Oley and I and the two employees walked the entire trail. And what a day. I just, what could be better? Pete Oley is your tour guide for the trailway. He told us all about the landmarks and different aspects of the trail and Hermit's Grave, and I could go on. And all these landmarks would be put on the trail, but first they had to be mapped out. So we spent quite a few hours walking the entire trail. And when the project was done and the maps were completed, Pete was so proud and so happy, and I felt the same way. I felt like I played a little role in this project. But having Pete Oley as a tour guide, it's just something I'll never forget. So you can see these different positions that I held in Irvington. Pete Oley played a role in every single one of them, and these are just a few examples. There are others. So I just feel so blessed that Pete Oley was able to be part of my entire career in different capacities. I just felt that I was lucky to have him as a friend, and Irvington was lucky to have him as a dedicated community member. Pete, you are missed by many people. Thank you very much.
Well, this all started back in the 80s, early 80s, I guess, when Reg Mayer was mayor, and he formed a blue ribbon task force to look at some environmental issues and to determine whether the village needed a village administrator. So Peter and I got involved in that process, and we both served on the Environmental Conservation Board about the same time. We both went on about the same time in the early 80s. And served on that, for many years. And Peter's first love was his family, but he loved the woods, and his most favorite loves were the trails and the woods and his track team and his family. So Peter and I would look at proposals. The Environmental Conservation Board, part of their responsibility is to review proposals from the planning department. Those proposals, we took site visits. Peter and I would walk if any of the other board members were available, but Peter and I always seemed to be the two that walked. We took video pictures of those areas, and Peter particularly loved, it's called the Woods now, it was called the Westwood property above the high school. He loved going there. He loved Hermit's Grave, the ice pond, and he used to tell me stories about the carriage trails. He knew all about that area. He knew it so well. I think he knew every rock. It was amazing, and he truly loved it. And we started talking about, we really have to try to save this. It was already on the planning board, at the planning board to be developed. And Peter and I talked about it and said, how are we going to save this? So we worked with the state, and we worked with the trustees and local attorneys, and lucky enough to acquire that and formed a trail committee, which Peter just was so excited about all of this because his track team was able to really spend a lot of time there, and they did they're still doing wonderful things up there. They help maintain the trails. Peter, it was one of his biggest accomplishments, I believe, was to preserve that property and form a trail committee so that his track team could run there and enjoy it. We also worked on, he had the vision, we both had the vision that the residents, it's a real benefit to the village. And I would say that was the biggest thing that Peter did as far as the environment. But of course, we looked at all the issues like Legend Hollow, Halsey Pond was important to Peter. We walked that many times. He was always concerned about anything that was environmental. Peter was there taking pictures. We were actually walked quite a bit. And right till the end, he was walking with me. And it was such a pleasure to work with him. He was such a gentleman and so kind, and just his heart was really in the environment, and loved nature and preserving the open space in Irvington.
So it would be safe to say, without that work that you guys did on that committee, Irvington might look a little differently today.
I think it would, because working with Peter, he seemed to have the most time of anybody else on our conservation board. We had about 5 people, but Peter and I were always the two that had the time to spend together. And he would call me and say, Jan, and we would always get together and in cahoots, I would say, and try to figure a way to, we'd always go to the planning board meetings and write proposals and recommendations, and yeah, so without Peter and without doing that work, yes, it would be different.
And would you say, Jan, the planning board, did they appreciate what you guys did, or they say, "Oh, here they come again"?
Sometimes they said, "Oh, here they are again," but it didn't chase us away. It didn't deter us at all. Peter was well respected, and he was the way he presented things to people. He's so convincing. He was so convincing, and it worked really well. I really enjoyed my time with him. We worked really well together, and yeah, he did a lot of good things. He did a lot of things I'm sure that people don't even know that he did.
Well, for somebody myself who spent a lot of time with Peter Oley as well, I think you are, you had a lot of patience, and obviously you shared an interest. I'm sure you were, a great co-worker with him. And I think probably, I'm guessing that every once in a while maybe had to rein him in a little bit, just because, he was so determined and just, I don't know about putting blinders on, but he had a single focus, it seemed like, and it probably helped to have somebody there to bounce ideas off and keep him on track a little bit, right?
Yeah, we pretty much agreed on things, but he'd always take that one extra step, and I'd say, okay, Peter, let's get our feet on the ground. But no, he was always such an advocate of the environment and all the environmental issues. He was concerned about water quality. He was concerned about the trees. He was concerned about just about everything that relates to the environment, the wildlife. So it's wonderful that he was able to work with others on preserving the woods for Irvington for the purposes of the trails and the beauty that's there. And I think it's great, and I'm so glad that they're naming the Peter Oley trails. I think it's wonderful. It's well deserved by Peter.
Now, looking back, it's been a number of years now since you all did that. Any lasting memories or any regrets or anything, as you look back? I'm sure you're very proud of what you've done, because you've made a huge impact on this village and the way it looks.
No regrets, except I'm sure Peter would agree with me if he was sitting here next to me. He'd say, we should have done more. But we did the best we could, and he was always there. And he was a little more convincing than I was. He had a lot more patience than I had. So he was good about that, trying to talk to the trustees and the planning board. But Peter was as you said, a very patient man, very kind and patient. You really couldn't refuse Peter.
Whatever Peter kind of wanted, he was going to make sure he. And that's true. And that, as I've done this series on him, I've heard similar things, of course, from those who ran on his track team. He could persuade guys to do things they never thought they could do. Mm-hmm. But also, it's interesting that the Reverend Harkness talked about similar qualities he brought to his church, and certainly the society here had a huge impact on them with his focus. So. Gosh, it's great to have this part of it, the environmental part. And we're going to interview some folks that work with him on the trails, former Boy Scouts and track guys. So any lasting comments you want to make about Coach Oley, Peter Oley, at this point, Jan?
Well, I guess I met him when we lived on Riverview Road, and so did he. We knew his family, and the whole family is just a wonderful family. And I really think I've said it all. I think he knew everybody in town, so except the newcomers that have been here, since his passing. But he knew everybody. He could walk down the street, and he always had something to say to somebody, everybody, There's always an issue that he was dealing with, because he was so involved in so many, the school, the track, the environment. It was just, Peter knew everybody and knew everything, so he was wonderful.
Yeah, and I think I've called him maybe the most influential person in Irvington for the last 50 years. I don't think is an exaggeration.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right about that. As I said, he just couldn't walk down the street without somebody stopping him and saying, "Peter, what about this? What about that?"
Yeah.
And he, like I said, he knew everything about the town. He certainly knew everything about the woods. Like I said, I think he knew every rock, because we'd walk and he would say, "Now this was here and this was over here." And he just knew everything about it.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Graham, a former student and resident of Irvington. I'd like to take a moment to talk about Coach Oley and Coach Oley's vision for the Irvington Woods. So my relationship spanned not just the track team, but also my time in the Boy Scouts. I remember a day vaguely now where I was coming to track practice and Coach Oley stopped me, pulled me aside, and he said, "Hey, aren't you in the Boy Scouts? What do you think about doing an Eagle Scout project in the Irvington Woods?" And you know, I don't know if I was fully set on becoming an Eagle Scout at the time, but Coach Oley proceeded to tell me about his vision for the Irvington Woods and this trail system that would be value added to the Boy Scouts as well as the track team. But really, Coach Oley's vision was for the value that it could add to the community. And so, yeah, this is the first conversation that solidified my developing goal of becoming an Eagle Scout, but more specifically the idea of an Eagle Scout project to revitalize the trail system. And so as I remember that time, I see Coach Oley as an orchestrator of this revitalization and development of the Irvington Woods trail system tied to a vision of what it could be for the community. And over time, he mobilized the Boy Scouts, or people in the Boy Scouts, and the track team and the cross-country team and the greater community through, I think, organizations like the Irvington Historical Society, which was newly developing, I believe, at the time, or at least they were just opening up a storefront location on Main Street. And so as I recall, it all started with Coach Oley's vision, and maybe the first project I believe was maybe initiating this vision was Bill Fiorito's project. And so Bill Fiorito worked on the Hermit's Grave project. So he did, I believe it was the east-west trail that went up to Hermit's Grave. So he did the signage and cleared the trail for that, and then also renovated, built up the Hermit's Grave sites, which had a lot of things had broken and kind of degraded. And so soon after that, maybe a year after that or so, Coach Oley, like I said before, encouraged me to take up a trail project as well. So ultimately I ended up doing what's called the North-South Trail with his mentorship and guidance. And then off of that, and this is Coach Oley had the vision for all of this, right? So he knew Hermit Wetlands, he knew Sunset Rock, he knew Split Rock, among other trails and connections that can be made through the Irvington Woods. And so he had this vision of piecing it together, starting with the East-West Trail and this North-South Trail with connecting trails to it, offshoot trails. And so since those initial projects, my understanding is lots of trail systems have been developed, and if you're back there a lot, you probably knew of them already, but there was no signage, the trails weren't always very clear, and so it was his vision that really kind of brought this back together as something that can be used. And so it was always interesting for me to come back, and I was always surprised to see the improvements that were being made. I remember coming back every once in a while and seeing a new bridge built over a stream. So a lot of people put a lot of work into this, and it was all part of Coach Oley's vision. And I find it rewarding to be a small part in Oley's vision and continued care that has gone into the Irvington Woods. All of the developments and benefits that come to this community through the local woods was really all connected back to Coach Oley, who had an idea and vision and was able to inspire, motivate, and mobilize people to bring that vision to light. So I hope Troop 55, which was Irvington's Boy Scout troop at that time, if it doesn't exist, the track team, the cross country team, and the greater community can continue to embrace the beauty of the woods and honor Coach Oley by caring for and enjoying the treasure of the Irvington Woods.
Hi, I'm Ian Matthews. I grew up in Irvington. I was a student at IHS from 2005 to 2009. Mr. Oley was one of those people that had a profound effect on me and my life. One of those people that, as a kid, as a teenager, really helps to set and guide your trajectory in a way that few others ever will. I was a runner in high school, and my first year at IHS was actually Mr. Oley's last year coaching. He was a wonderful coach. We had a great time that season. Not that the distance team was particularly good, but we really connected, Mr. Oley and I, after he retired from coaching. In my sophomore year, I became really invested in revitalizing the trail system in the Irvington Woods. And probably an unsurprising coincidence, Mr. Oley was chair of the Irvington Trails Committee. And we started to work really closely together, particularly that summer after my sophomore year. During that summer, my job was basically to supply labor, which amounted to a dozen or so scrawny distance runners showing up every Saturday and Sunday to cut trails and move rocks. Mr. Oley's job was to provide the wisdom that we sorely needed. And it was amazing what that wisdom could do. One of my favorite memories is around 10 of us were trying to move this pretty large boulder. It must have been a few hundred pounds. And we're pushing and shoving and making no progress. And then Mr. Oley walks over with a large fallen limb, probably 10 feet long. And he places one end under the rock, walks back to the other end, and lifts the rock all on his own. I can't remember exactly what he said as we all looked at him, feeling like idiots. But whatever it was, it really conveyed a certain use your brain. My fondest memories of that summer, though, are of our conversations. That summer I was working in the city, and at least several times a week I would take my lunch break to sit on a bench and call Mr. Oley. Nominally, this was all to plan for the upcoming weekend's trail work, but our conversations would quickly veer off as he told me stories of Irvington from decades past, while also really just sitting there and listening to teenage me. He would ask me the questions that I needed to be asked, and he would support me in my goals, really validating me in whatever I was doing. As long as what I was doing was something that did good, and probably most importantly, that brought me joy. Some days we would just talk for hours on the phone. I think we're all continuing to relive Mr. Oley's memory today because more than anything, he loved people. Not in the extroverted sense, though I think he was that, but in the sense that he cared deeply about others. He loved the people in his life, and he really saw the beauty in everyone. He could recall the splits of the slowest runner on the team as immediately as he did for the star athlete, and he would celebrate everyone's triumphs with equal and unparalleled enthusiasm. Without Mr. Oley, the Irvington Trails would not exist how they are today. And on a personal note, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. I'm so grateful for the time we got to spend together. My many thanks to Dr. Mosenthal and everyone who helped put this together, and to everyone who continues the memory of Mr. Oley. Thank you.
Okay, panelists, if you join us, clicking on your, unclicking your mute button and your video. See how well we do here. Okay, waiting for, here comes Jan, here comes Pat, good. Okay, I think we've got everybody, right, Chet? Okay, if some of you have your mute button on, if you Jan and Pat, if you could unmute. Chet, likewise, you could join us. We got everybody? Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, first, a huge thanks for everybody and the job you've done here. It was, as you may have guessed, for me, just a wonderful, wonderful experience to sit down and hear stories and recollections of a guy who has left just such an impact on this village. A couple of thank yous here. In addition to the presenters, again, I could not have asked for a better, more helpful, or more knowledgeable group. I'd also like to thank our outstanding videographer, Nader Sadra, as well as our indefatigable technical marvel, Chet Kerr, for helping to put this program together. Finally, thanks to all of you for listening in. I'd like to remind you that this presentation will be posted on the Society's website in the near future, in case somebody you know may have missed it. At this point, I'd like to open the chat for several minutes to see if anybody's got questions or comments. I do have some questions for our panelists. If I may start with the first one, I thought I'd start with Betsy since you began. I'd just like to start a question with you. And again, others, if you want to chat, jump in. But Betsy, you knew Peter for many years. You were part of the resurrection of the Irvington Historical Society, as you mentioned, back in the mid-90s. I'm curious as to what inspired you and Peter and the others to bring that organization back to life at that time.
Well, there was so much history in Irvington about people and places that needed to be preserved and recorded. Peter's determination to do that was nonstop. As information and artifacts became accumulated over about 8 years, there was a definite need for a permanent home. And Peter and I and others, we all formed a team to bring the reality of the McVicker House to the forefront, and where the society is today owes its thanks to Peter Oley, because he really got the ball rolling. So thank you, Peter.
The driving force. Pat, quick question for you. Again, you know Peter for many, many years, as you described in your video. For those in the audience, I imagine we have some people maybe that never had the opportunity to meet Peter Oley or know of what he accomplished for the village. Why do you think he had such a lasting impact on Irvington?
Well, I would imagine from hearing people that we heard from today, you can see not just the depth of Peter's interest, but the breadth of them. So that I honestly believe there wasn't an area of the village that he wasn't interested in. And he, in that way, touched so many different people. And I have to say that Peter's enthusiasm was infectious and sometimes daunting. There would be times when you would almost be kind of overwhelmed by it. But he would kind of stick with something. He wouldn't let it go. He wouldn't get discouraged, as many of us do. He would kind of just soldier on. And as I said, he would find another way if he had to. But he could weave together different projects, like they mentioned with the trail, weaving together his absolute love and respect for the environment with his track team and his kids and the coaching, and then wanting to know the history of the woods. He wasn't interested in just one aspect. He was interested in every aspect. He was an amazing, amazing man.
So that graphic of the bulldog with the bone
Yes.
seemed to maybe fit pretty well. Okay, thanks for that, Don. It's funny, listening to you, I am reminded that on the first day when I was lucky enough to be appointed as principal of the high school, guess who knocked on my door? In comes Peter Oley, and he's got these articles. He said, "Oh, that's great, congratulations! But here's some articles you might want to read to help you as you take on your new job." And he was just interested in everybody and everything. But in your situation, I can picture dozens of former students listening, because they all probably took that hike with Peter to the hermit's grave, when they were kids at Dow's Lane. And you touched on it, and Jan touched on it also, but that just being with Peter in the woods, what really made that so special for you, would you say?
Well, it wasn't just a walk in the woods. It was a walking classroom, pretty much. As we walked, and thankfully we didn't rush. And as we walked along, Pete would stop every once in a while and look at a rock formation, or tell me about a tree, or a certain bend that we're going around, or what. He just has such knowledge of obviously nature, but just the trail itself. And that's what made it that's why I kept saying in the video how great it was to walk the trail of Pete Oley, because he was the master. It's his trail. And that's what I remember the most, the details and the things that he knew about the woods. That was the most inspiring for me, and most enjoyable.
Great. Jana, you mentioned being lucky enough to have been on those trails with Peter for literally probably hundreds of hours. And there's this person who knows the woods second to Peter. You probably qualify, it sounds like. Can you think of any a particular incident, a day when you were out, or a story that just when you think about that time you spent with him that comes to mind, that kind of encapsulates what Peter was about?
Well, we did spend quite a few hours walking the woods, especially because of our, responsibility with the Environmental Conservation Board. And walking with Peter, I think Don said it, walking with Peter was like taking a history lesson, because he knew every rock and every tree. He knew the history of all the spaces, the rock outcropping, Hermit's Grave, the ice pond, and he pointed out the rocks where the kids used to have the parties. And he loved the history and everything about nature. He was always concerned about preserving the character and history of Irvington, and nature was a really big part of his life. He was concerned about the entire village, not just the woods, but the open spaces. And I remember one time before Legend Hollow was developed, we took a walk up there before the planning board reviewed the project. And we took a video, and we hiked, I don't know how many hours we hiked, but he'd say, "Look at this and look at that." And he was just, as I think someone else pointed out, he pointed out everything about the property and the plants and the stream. And it's just amazing. And he loved Halsey Pond. He spent a lot of time there. And Peter, he was always ready to take a walk. I'd say, "Peter, you want to walk?" Or he'd call me and say, "Jan, let's go check this out." And he was thrilled that the woods were able to be saved and to create trails, because he said right away, "Oh, I can get my guys out there to run the trails now." And then he said, "Oh, they can help clear the trails and work on the trails." So that was a big project for him. And he took it on right away and made it happen. And he was just an amazing person. And I think, as everybody has said, he just got along with everybody. He was always smiling and friendly. And if you saw him in the street and you didn't have a lot of time, you'd have to plan on spending at least a half hour or more, before you could get away. But he just loved talking about the woods and the trails and all of that. Don gets it. He knows how it goes. But he was just an amazing person, and he really did make a major impact on the village of Irvington.
This is really great timing. Thanks for that. We have a chat comment from a former student who now is a professor, and I would encourage you to take a look at what was said there about Peter's impact on him. This person now is an environmental scientist, environmentalist. It's pretty interesting. He goes back to 1963 with Peter. That's again kind of indicative of the kind of impact he had. Reverend Harkness, my question for you is a little different. I'm not so sure. I think you brought to it an aspect that I'm not so sure a whole lot of people were aware of, besides those maybe who attend the Presbyterian Church in Irvington. And I was, as I listened to you, I just think, well, how did he have time for that? My gosh, he did, the track thing, the woods thing, how did he fit? And you've described him as being very involved in your church. I'm curious to know, because I think churches, it's hard because everything's volunteer. You got to have people just willingly step forward. And obviously Peter did that. I wondered what kind of influence or impact would you say he had on your other congregants? Certainly he led by example, but I'm sure he probably, talked some people into doing some things for the church that may not have been done otherwise.
Yeah, he had that ability to talk people into a lot of things, but it didn't come out of nowhere. Everybody knew him in the life of the church from his other involvements, and he didn't have to explain himself in church. It's a different role for Peter because he's sitting in a pew. If he's not in a meeting, a board meeting of some kind. And by the way, meetings are incredibly tiresome. I don't have to tell all of you, you've been in plenty of meetings. They can go sideways in a hurry just because of the personalities that are there. But, Peter, he was a wonderful person to have in church because he was always so supportive of my ministry. I don't know if it was deserved or not. He would always come up and have something to say. I think it was, maybe to answer your question, it was kind of the tender side of Peter that came out for me as his pastor. He didn't have to be in charge. And he was there to receive something and not there necessarily to give something.
Okay, thanks for that. Again, the point of this whole presentation was to kind of explore other aspects of Peter, and I think that's a really valuable piece of it to hear your experiences with him. I thought it'd be very interesting to hear from Chet at this point, who actually was in the woods not too long ago and walking with some people who are tree experts, and they discovered some remarkable things. Chet, would you take a minute to share those with us?
So what I think is remarkable, people talk about Peter and his interest in the woods and whatever, but that interest and the woods continue to echo and become more important to the community even today, and largely because of the things that he kind of kicked off. The current Irvington Woods Committee and members of that committee, C.J. Riley, who is the director of the O'Hare Nature Center, have just done remarkable things to really bring that to the fore. And I had the pleasure of going on a hike, following CJ and Warwick Norton, who was member of the Woods Committee the other day. And we went trooping off and we found, they pointed out a tree to me that's a white oak. It's 318 years old. One of the oldest trees in probably the eastern United States. And it's just remarkable tying together his interest in the environment and the interest in history, and thinking about that tree was probably planted in 1706 and kind of went through and saw all of that through the years. And so it just, again, it's wonderful to hear what Peter did when he was alive, but his legacy continues to make an impact and bring new joy to a whole new host of people who moved into our village since his passing.
Okay, thank you for that. I see another chat from Ellen about being in his first class at Irvington. I'd love to, if you want to send that photograph along, I'll contact you when we get done here. I would like to end, if I may, with a note that Ian Matthews had a family obligation today, so he couldn't join us for the panel discussion. But I just thought he had a great comment, and I'll shorten this because it's fairly long. But he mentioned that when he knew Peter Oley, he really enjoyed talking to him. And as everybody has said, talking to Peter Oley was no small event. It was a major part of your day in most cases. And he noticed that when Peter would run into adults, that they maybe had less interest in spending half their day listening to Coach Oley than he did. He said it was one of the best things that ever happened to him as a kid. he said now as he's gotten older, he's coming into middle age, that he can better empathize with those of us perhaps that didn't really have an hour to just sit down and listen to Coach Oley. And I'm gonna pick up from what he says. Time feels like an ever more precious commodity, and there's always something that seems to need doing. But I think that the wisdom in Mr. Oley's words was of greater value than whatever else was going on. And I would give so much to be able to again sit down with Mr. Oley and mine his wisdom for lessons on life. So the lesson of Mr. Oley that I try to carry forward today, not that I always live up to it, is to slow down and make more time for the people and ideas that are important. You know, it practically brings tears to my eyes to say that. In any event, I again appreciate so much of you for panelists particularly, but our visitors who've taken the time out of your day to watch this this webinar. Chet, again, Nadra, thanks for your help. For me, it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to work with you, to hear about Peter Oley, one of my dearest friends, and know that his legacy does live on, will live on in so many ways, and how fortunate we all are to have him as part of our life. Chet, I'm going to turn it back to you. I don't know if we've got a final comment or not.
And I just want to mention Jeremy's your comment about Peter was just.
Oh, there's
lovely.
Jeremy. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jeremy. I didn't see you come on before. You have to unmute yourself, Jeremy. There you go.
Yeah. So I just
Jeremy,
appreciated Jeremy's comments about Peter as well.
Yeah, and I don't know, Jeremy, if you want a final word about the impact Coach Oley had on you.
Yeah, maybe I thought what you just said was a great ending, but I'll just add I think with the track experience and the Boy Scout experience, and then just hearing all this, I think really he had a way of interweaving this vision and bringing the right ideas forward into action. And so I remember from the track team the importance of winning and how to get there, but then how that was all pieced together with this whole fabric of Irvington and community. And so I think that I really reflect on that and take that with me. And also just the aspect of selflessness that was part of all of that. And maybe if I could add just one quick story that I remember is, you know, when I was on the track team starting off, I must have been a freshman or something. And I don't think this was just me, but he would take us to the Roadrunners, right? And so he would drive us there as the athletes, right, and have us try on shoes and test them out there, and then you know, and I think in my case he purchased the shoes for us. I don't know where that money came from, if it was personal money or not, but you know, especially as a father, a husband, father with kids, taking that kind of time out of your day for different people, I think it's just an example story of the selfless mindset he had towards everybody and all the projects and visions he took on.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that. And that would have been money out of his pocket. I was on him on a number of those trips, and he would do that for anybody. You know, that was just kind of the guy he was.
So
Thanks,
Scott,
Jeremy.
if I can, I think Veronica Gedrich, who is the president of the Irvington Historical Society, wanted to see if she could join for a moment. And I think hopefully, Veronica, if you can turn your camera on and join us. I think she just wanted to say thank you. Well, she may not be able to do that technically. So let me, on behalf of the Historical Society, just thank you, Scott, for putting this program together, and all the panelists for just this marvelous way that this brought Peter's life to fore. And it just, this and one nice thing about being in this village is the fact that we have a great wealth of people, who care about others. And I think Peter really emulates that and emulated that in so many ways.